We finally have info for the third balance patch since Tier 3. And this comes with some massive nerfs, but also some buffs here and there. We have some fixes, what is most likely a massive crossbow nerf affecting all those crossbow PvE builds, Rip Fury, Scorpion, Battle Weaver, and it may barely have any impact on Crucifix. I don't know what the devs are doing. There are some big staff buffs here with a lot of damage improvements, but then some massive PvP damage nerfs for Orb. There will be some really cool new furniture you can get from the 2 different whales. Battlegrounds, the ranked mode is getting some adjustments. We still have yet to wait till we get that release. Maybe this Thursday. They're updating the material transmutation system a bit. They're also making it a lot easier to get the materials needed to upgrade the skill cores for Archboss weapons. And then we have some new promotions with regards to furniture and some skins. So let's get into all the details and what this means for the current balance and meta of the game. If we jump back to the top, there's a dev comment here, and they say, after the addition of Orb, the Mark of Mortality and the Detonation Mark show a much stronger synergy than intended when combined with the new weapon. It allows to take a portion of subsequent accumulated damage without limitation, and while other skills have a structure that require direct input and timing management to accumulate damage, the Mark simply just does it without any additional risk. So they're making some adjustments to it, providing appropriate limits to prevent excessive cumulative damage. So the first things they list here is actually the fact they're making shields of the same type no longer overlap. This is a good thing, meaning you can't have multiple oracles stacking shields on each other, with some people running around with over 120,000 shield in a party. So again, this should put an end to that. All these abilities will not stack with themselves. They're making a slight adjustment to the Juno boat spear. They don't appear to be addressing the core issue, where they simply went and switched up the skill effect, decided they're not going to bother upgrading it this time around, as they recently changed the tooltip back to the tier 1 version. But it still had a bug where you could damage your allies with it. So this should be fixed. And the Twilight set, the one where you can get the shield health, the buff icon for it has been fixed. Then for your sword and shield, your counter barrier with the concentrated barrier should be fixed properly with a maximum cap now of 60,000. But then we get into the massive crossbow nerf. So your detonation mark, even your mark of mortality, now has a maximum of 50,000 of your base damage %. For this, we need to do a little bit of math. I'll put a link to this formula below, or at least this video where I explain how to use it. So in combat, when we have our buff abilities, on Fury here, we have base damage of 153 to 725. So inputting these values, we find if it's a simple 50,000% of your base damage, and this is going to be an average, we find the damage cap to be just over 200,000 for these stats. But this is a little bit odd, because that would mean every time you cast it that the maximum cap would change for that instance of the skill, which I just don't see as that being the main logical way they would do this. In all likelihood, it's going to scale just of your maximum weapon base damage, so the 725, meaning a more likely scenario of a max of 360,000, at least with 725. We can ignore the crit and the heavy because we don't actually have those stats listed right here. But that does throw into the effect, would it scale off your other stats too? If it did scale off your stats, it is much more likely to also use the min base damage. And we'll throw in some stats here of like a PvE build. About 2,000 crit chance, heavy attack, 70% crit damage, 125% heavy attack damage, and so on. And what you find is average 1.4 million. This means every time you cast Detonation Mark, the damage cap for that instance of it is going to change based on what stats you have, and whether that damage cap, crits, heavy attacks, orders rolls between your min and max base damage. But what that would mean is not really any change whatsoever with regards to Crucifix. Even for Fury on that matter, with curse explosions over 900,000, my detonation mark, which I cast every 4 or 5 seconds, will hit upwards of 1 million, and not a whole lot more. So if this damage cap did scale off stats, well, the average cap's like 1.4 million, so I probably wouldn't feel affected. And that's going to be the same for Crucifix, albeit Crucifix does have the potential to have much higher detonation marks. However, the way you play Crucifix is you use Selfless Diffusion and you spam all your weakens, and thus you get a ton of cooldown reduction, and so you have the ability to just spam detonation mark. So even if the cap is lower for the maximum amount of damage it can store, that wouldn't change your damage if you just keep recasting it. Ultimately, we can't do a lot right now other than speculate, so we'll ultimately just have to test and see later. But it could bode very ill for any class that can't cast detonation mark within like 1 or 2 seconds. Meaning the combination of Crossbow, Wand, Fury would be heavily nerfed. Crossbow Staff similarly, along with Crossbow Dagger. And then least affected would be Crossbow Orb. So this ultimately feels really bad. The class that needed the nerf ends up being the least impacted versus all these other classes. And it's build diversity that we want, right? That's the point of nerfing Orb, to put it more in line with those other weapons. But they end up indirectly nerfing those other classes by trying to nerf Crucifix. But moving on with the weapon changes. The Longbow passive to give you the crit damage, this should be getting a bit of a duration buff. And then Staff is getting a whole bunch of boosts. I believe this is your focused firebombs. It's going from like 510% to nearly 600%, with also an improvement of the base damage boost. Ice Spear as well, from 430% to 510%. And Ice Spear Bombardment too, 86% to 102% per spear. On top of that, Lightning Judgment, 780% to 880%. So across the board, some small boosts again that overall are going to accumulate to some decent staff buffs. Again, not sure what they're doing. There are plenty of other weapons they could buff instead. It's really the melee weapons that are struggling in this current meta. But then we look at these orb changes. So what they're doing directly here is simply nerfing PvP damage. So for Stellar Dash, they are halving its effect in PvP. This is a massive nerf. This is what we expected for PvE. But no, they're just doing this for PvP. It will quite literally do half the amount of damage that it did before with this ability, even when you use your Summon Satellite. The damage actually being far more than halved, along with removing that CC effect with the movement speed reduction from Supernova Collapse, which should mean you can just walk out of this thing, making it far less oppressive in GVG. But yeah, that was it for the weapon changes for this patch. Again, we're going to have to really test what this actually means. 50,000% of base damage. In which case of the formula are they going to be using? Is your detonation mark going to be a maximum of like 350,000? Or can it still go upwards of 2 million? Or the worst case scenario, it ends up taking your min and max base damage, and then you have like 200,000 max, which is an absolute massive nerf to a class like Fury, which solely relies on your Curse Explosion plus Detonation Mark for damage, and really nothing else. But then we look at some further changes. There will now be these floating islands that appear near the whales, and you can get some gatherables on them. And you'll be able to craft a bed and a lamp, and this is what it looks like. Super cool. From Gigantorite and Minurite. Battlegrounds are getting some adjustments, so the Korean server already has ranked mode. They have limited time slots, and that's very likely to also going to be the case for us on Global, just so that the matchmaking can be more accurate and fair. we may very well get this week, with the option for some matches to have just 18 versus 18. You will be able to have some ranked rewards you can get every week, like Chaos Runes, Nebula Chests, Conversion Stones, so on. They are adding some party pings here, and the Material Transmutation is just getting some slight UI updates, but still doesn't seem like they're adding tier 3 gear as an option to put in there. With cooking, you can now select to obtain ingredients from boxes that you may have or selection chests, and they're increasing the combat power of Talandre and tier 1 Archboss weapons when upgraded, along with the fact you'll be able to get much more participation rewards for those upgrade materials, again for tier 1 Archboss weapons and tier 2 Archboss weapons. You now get 8 instead of 4. Along with the peace ranking rewards. So you get top 6 and you're getting 4. Even if you're 13 to 100th place, you're now getting 2 instead of 1. And this also affects the guild raids of these archbosses, which looks like they will be planning to add the guild raids of Telas Noah and Giant Cordy then, doubling the amount you can get. So that should just mean it'll be a lot easier to be able to upgrade these. However, keep in mind, since they did introduce the ascended tier 2 Archboss weapons, we basically have half the amount of the tier 1 ascended Archbosses. For example, I'll now only have Tevent once every 2 weeks on peace versus twice every 2 weeks. So this simply goes to help putting it at the same level as it was originally when we just had tier 1 archbosses. There are some housing UI updates here as well, and some improvements to the gathering rewards. There are some promotion details for some new housing furniture here. I can show them later when we actually get this patch, as it should be out on the Korean server later tomorrow morning. And this is the same blog, just highlighting that they have their skin rotations. Oh, and they do say here, you will be able to transfer heroic equipment between different slot types. So you can transfer your heroic cloak to your heroic arms if you wanted to, or your heroic necklace to heroic earrings. We'll have to confirm, but this looks like syncing for heroic equipment. It would be very strange if they finally added that after Tico saying very adamantly that they would never add it, or at least that they never planned on adding it. Maybe they finally changed their mind. And those of you stuck on the path of ascension where you needed to do a random party matchmaking boss, this has now been changed to just killing some monsters. I'm not sure what was so hard about that. You just needed to go to party matchmaking and queue up randomly here. But you had to do it not in a party for it to count. I don't know why they didn't just fix that bug. But yeah, that's ultimately it for this update. Again, pretty sad to see that they don't seem to care about anything other than Crucifix. Yes, they're trying to cap its damage output a bit, give it a little bit more balance, but out of these changes, putting this cap to detonation mark is much more likely to have a bigger nerf to classes like Scorpion, Fury, Battle Weaver, and any other class that literally uses Crossbow for damage support compared to what the effect will have on Crucifix, which has enough weakens to get enough cooldown from Selfless to be able to spam that detonation mark an awful lot more. And I assume every time you recast it, you're going to refresh that cap anew, allowing you to accumulate all that more damage again. But these things are going to have to be tested, and keep in mind you can have 2 stacks of detonation mark, which may very well also result in this cap effect being doubled, meaning instead of like 300,000, the actual cap would be 600,000 if you had 2 stacks. So all of this needs some thorough testing when we get the patch on the Korean server and later on the global server on Thursday. So overall, thanks for watching. A special thank you to the extra support of my channel members, and we'll see you guys around.